what happens in the community, right? Our children are educated, and they're always being educated outside of the school as well. That's a big part of it. So we talk about achievement gaps, but then we also have to look at the opportunity gaps. So the mayor said he was leaving to go, there was this outside program. Those programs, when our students and our children have access to those types of opportunities, then those are the things they directly help to close the academic and achievement gap as well.
Fantastic. Tanya Rodriguez-Hodges, I want to get you to weigh in on this whole idea of discipline and when we factor in, race relations, the impact that it has and the disparities that we see.
I think that the largest disparity that we are dealing with in the Latino community, because clearly I am representing the Latino community, is that we do not have a seat at the table. And I think that it's for a lack of interest and a lack of understanding and a lack of assumption that either A, we don't want a seat at the table, or we are packing a suitcase in our right hand and a gallon of water in our left hand, and we've just crossed some invisible border that we do not belong here. So with that said, something like this today brings us to the table. We have the same issues in our households that we see across our state. We have the same disciplinary issues that we see across our state. You might have someone that says, I'm going to expel a student because the student is tardy and the student has not been in class. I would dare say, can we ask why the student is tardy? Is the student by chance the first generation Latino American born and raised here and is serving as the interpreter for their parents during a medical appointment? Is that student staying home because someone is going to come by from SCE&G and inspect the home that they're renting, and the parents are so fearful that something might be wrong that the student says, I'll stay home, Mom, because I know that you want to be able to communicate properly with the person that's coming. So for us, I often am asked, well, it's your turn. Don't you feel that it's your turn? I don't know that it's our turn to be abused. I don't know that it's our turn ever to say from one person of godly creature to another godly creature, it's your turn to be abused. I feel that it is now more than ever more prevalent in our communities across this state and across our country that we are now finally speaking more open and honestly about what needs to be done and how we join hands down the path together, opposed to turning backs on one another and pretending as though the issues are not there and we can just kind of rough edge them over and hope and pray that they go away, which we have learned through history that they do not. They just fester and get larger and larger.
Well, and I would like to also, and maybe you want to weigh in on this as well, point out that when we talk about racial diversity, it is not just black and white. There are a lot of other, and maybe John can weigh in on this, when we talk about diversity, it's not just an issue of black and white. And, there seems to be this notion that, whenever you need a black person or you need a Latino person, the same person gets the call over and over again. You're on every panel I moderate where they need a Latino person, just keeping it real. But I know that there are other people in the community who can articulate those issues and concerns, but it's, where do we have those relationships? Where have we stepped outside of our comfort zone to try and understand somebody else in their walk of life and what they bring to the table?
Right. Again, it goes back to being interested in each other and being and wanting to have that open line of dialogue and asking a question. Would you prefer Latino or would you prefer Hispanic? What is the big deal? Something so small that someone will say, I don't want to say it. And recently on a panel that we did on your show 2 weeks back, the question came up. I see it every day. People will hesitate to say African American or black. Because in that moment, am I going to upset someone with black? Or do I say African American? Do I say Latino? Do I say Latino American? And so with that, I feel that if we can just come together and have a greater dialogue, and yes, I am on, and I do it with honor and privilege, thank you so much.
You do a great job, I'm just saying.
Thank you. But, you know, I find that I become very important during election terms, and I become very important when there is something special in the community that you need a boost of 5,000 to 10,000 people to show up. And then all of a sudden we become important, and that should not be the case.
Right.
It shouldn't be the case on just something like this, and so I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to actually say, this is what we have. It's literally the same issues that we have in our home. If my son at 20 years of age does something that I don't approve of, it may not go on social media, but trust me, the entire family knows it has been chastised, it has been brought down, and he will never repeat the behavior again. And that is the same that you find across any good American family, which we all are trying to raise our children to be better than we are, right? To get to a greater level of success than we had in order to bring forward those that are behind us.
Well, and thank you for that. I want to give the microphone to John now, because as we talk about this issue of race relations, I just want to make sure that we are not just bringing one experience to the table, you know, that of African American children or one socioeconomic status.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that anyone certainly recognizes that. I always tell this story, you know, I born and raised here in Columbia, South Carolina, but lived in Chicago for 12 years. And I'll never forget coming home to be Chief Diversity Officer here at the University of South Carolina. And when I talk with people immediately, and they learn that I was Chief Diversity Officer, immediately they talk about black folks or black issues as if the only person that I represented or only people that I represented were black people. But here's the thing that I understand deeply, and I think we all understand about South Carolina. There is extraordinary history behind race relations between white and black people, and we can't disengage from that. We can't not recognize that. Yet at the same time, we also have to recognize the intersectionality of all of this difference. That in fact there are young children who today are born to white and black parents, or Latino and Asian parents, or Muslim and gay parents. So there are extraordinary intersectionalities, and that will continue to exist. U.S. Census said 3 things about our demographics, and these are facts, these are not projections, that of children under the age of 5, 50% are identified as minority. That of those families of children under the age of 5, they're much poorer than families of children or young adults today who are 18. And then finally, for every 100 18-year-olds, there are only 95 4-year-olds. So I mean, we're seeing these extraordinary shifts that are happening, and I think that you're absolutely right again to talk about the intersectionalities of race, gender identity, of religious identity, of identity in a very broad sense. But again, I think for us to not talk very specifically about race in South Carolina would be a misstep, because again, race has been such a pervasive issue here in South Carolina, particularly between black and white communities.
I'm getting some great questions from the audience. Keep them coming. I have one for the commissioners I'll get to in just a moment, but first I want to ask this question, and it's for anybody who can offer insight. The question is, as a former school teacher, white, middle class, one of my walls I ran into, a need of my own in understanding of cultural communication with parents of a different socioeconomic group. That is an excellent question. So the question is this: how can mentoring of teachers be accomplished to help them in their effectiveness? Kevin? You look like you're ready to preach.
Well, in the environment that we're in, the majority of our kids are African American kids. And so we have our Spanish teacher, and we had some of our white teachers, and that was one of the first questions they gave me. Number one, you had the challenge of the boys that, most of the boys we had behavioral issues. But they were saying to me, Mr. Raspberry, it's easy for you to communicate with most of these kids because they feel like they relate to you. And I asked them, what do you feel makes you different? She said, well, I'm white. Well, I just told her, stop being white. Stop being white. Stop identifying yourself as white when you talk to them, because you separate yourself from them, because they can feel that when you talk to them. And so I said, you just talk to them. Ask them questions, ask them open-ended questions. Talk to them each day when they come in. And so my communication with them, I told them I'll be 45 this year, and most of the kids in our school are 11, 12, and 13. So, the similarities stop at black, because I don't understand some of the lingo they're using. So I sit and I ask them, what does that mean? What does fleet mean? Or all these different terms that they use. And so that began to open dialogue with them. And that's what I encouraged our teachers to do, was allow them, you just be the facilitator of information. Allow them to ask questions. And that way, when they come to you, they'll stop seeing you as white, and you can stop seeing them as black, and just be the answer to the question that they have.
Well,
and that's been successful.
The person who submitted the question says there are a lot of talented teachers out there, but the type of those skills that we're talking about, the relationships, crossing those cultural and social economic lines, they don't teach that in school. Tanya?
For the Hispanic community, I will say this, because I am a Reformed South Carolinian, but I was born and raised in New York, and I was referred to as a New Yorican, which meant that my parents were from Puerto Rico, and I was born in New York, and with descendants or family from Puerto Rico. So coming here, it was a difference that I had to figure out for myself. And what we found through our organization and working grassroots through the communities was that, especially in education, the best time to reach parents, and you may not want to hear this, is Sunday. Because typically, the males in the household are the ones that are the head of household, and they take that role quite seriously. The machismo comes in, and they are going to be in charge of that household. And when you look at the structure of work, they are typically in an agricultural or yard landscaping type of job. And those jobs run Monday through Saturday. So oftentimes from teachers we sent a note home, we got nothing back from the student, we had no choice. Expulsion was the next level. Well, okay, first of all, you're sending a child home to be home alone, more than likely, or to take on more adult responsibility. And secondly, the parents probably did not get the note until after, the lights were out in the household. It was dark out. It's probably encroaching upon 11 p.m. And the last thing that they want to do is read. But if we were to extend an olive branch to say, would it be better? Could it possibly be better for me to be available to you, to avail myself to your schedule on a Saturday evening or on a Sunday? I promise you, for 1 out of every 3 parents you ask, they would smile from ear to ear and say, absolutely. If you could do that for me, I could get a better pulse on what my child is doing and how I need to discipline that child in the manner in which deservingly it is necessary for them to understand that we are now communicating,
right,
and there can be no more shenanigans, because now I am fully aware of what is going on in your day-to-day, Monday through Friday schedule.
That is a great question. It's a great segue to a question for one of the school board commissioners. And if either one of you, I think that microphone is working. If not, you can come and share my microphone. But the question is this: do you have any statistics, and even if it's not hard statistics, but some insight on the success of disciplinary methods used in our schools? So as we start to shift our focus a little bit in our conversation, because we're moving into the second half of our time, about what Ellen was saying, talking about common sense reforms, what methods of disciplinary action are working in our schools, and what kind of reforms do we need to consider?
I don't have a mic, so I'll take it.
Commissioner Mackey?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that we've been talking about, particularly in District 2, is just being intentional about expulsions and suspensions, and since I've been on board, which has been about 8-9 months now, making sure that we are intentional with making sure that things are equitable with regard to suspensions and expulsions, or it's the same thing done with this child historically as other children, but one of the things that concerns me is that by the time a child gets to school and you're at the suspension or expulsion level, oftentimes, it's late. Echoing with Ms. Rodriguez-Hott just says, I think that we can work in the community. We need to have communications with our families when a child is in trouble, to talk to the families and make sure that we have diversity at the leadership level. So that when we have leaders and teachers and administrators who are sensitive as to why, and why, I forget what you just said, why? Why, because you again, why is a child in trouble? Why did this happen? Why is this systemically recurring? Why? And maybe something we need to address in the school at the leadership level, but having diversity at the leadership level. Cultural sensitivity, not just, black, white, racial, but cultural sensitivity with regard to our leaders, and that trickles down to disciplinary measures and scenarios, and hopefully encapsulate those and try to figure out why. It's not about just what you did, but why you did it.
If you would be so kind as to pass the microphone to Dr. Gail Wilson-Giordano to talk about, kind of weigh in on that as well.
I did want to weigh this. City Year, we recruit a diverse group of idealistic young AmeriCorps members that come and they serve as full-time tutors and mentors in our schools. So certainly the understanding that the schools can't do it all, represent it all, but school districts, we're in Richland 1, that's one of the reasons I know that they select to partner with other organizations to help provide some of these diversity, to make sure that the students see someone, whether it's racial, gender, social economic, that represents them. So City Year focuses on attendance, because kids have to come to school, behavior, and course performance. If the teacher, because the teachers are so busy, are unable to address a particular child, that one child's behavior over and over, that's where they can turn to the partner and hopefully a core member that can identify with that student can address that in, we call them near peers, in a way that's an alternative to suspension or expelling them. So I do think, again, it's what resources are available. Teacher, you can't be what you're not, but certainly if the only person of color that a student sees in their school is the custodian or the kitchen person, I mean, what's the message there, right? How important is my culture and is my community if the folks that are making decisions about me and my family don't know anything about me?
A question for the panel, and this is open to anyone who'd like to answer. It is many Midlands districts have moved to magnet or lottery choice programs in schools. The question is, how do we design such programs to benefit all students? Can someone address that? Maybe even one of our board commissioners? Ellen?
That sounds to me like a question about education choice, which is something that we research a lot at Palmetto Promise. It's an honor to be sitting next to Kevin, who is one of the intrepid front runners of the choice movement in South Carolina when it comes to charter schools. It's my personal belief that every child, regardless of their ethnicity or their income or their zip code, should have the opportunity to go to the school that their parent believes best suits their individual needs. Whether that be the traditional public school, whether that be a public charter school, whether that be a scholarship to go to a high-performing private school, whether it be online education. It's amazing all of the innovations that are happening in digital education, both here in South Carolina and around the country. The point is, we can't continue to look at education like we have for the last 150 years, which, as Bud said, was built in a very agrarian system that was preparing folks to work in a field, not to work at a Boeing plant. And that's not the reality here in South Carolina anymore. So until we figure out how to open up high-quality options outside of the public traditional system, as well as improving the education that's delivered in the public educational system, I think we'll continue to just get the same results here in South Carolina.
Kevin, yes, briefly, and then one more question.
One of the things that I always want to relay to people when it comes to myself starting a charter school, and is that I feel that we have burdened our current districts to the point of exhaustion. Personally, I believe that we are not diversified enough in education, and I think we're robbing our kids. by not having that. But the way that conversation starts is we have to stop making districts feel defensive in the fact that you're inept to educate our kids when they're inundated with all different types of kids. And so if you want to, either one or two things need to happen. I was talking to Mr. Ford about this. Either you come up with something that is truly innovative to help our kids, or you just need to close your mouth, go into district, and help them. Because, you know, creating drama, creating competition, there's no competition in education. We all should be helping them. So when you create charters, you create all of these different type of schools, it needs to be to assist and not so much to try to show them up, because that's not fair. That, to me, that's not fair, because these districts, they're doing all that they can do. So when you come and you present something, it should be in partnership to help our district.
Well, and I think the question of funding comes in there as well to try and see how districts can manage all of that. I want to get to that if we can, but I want to get to the audience questions as much as possible since you all took the time to be here. So hopefully we'll get back to that. Let me ask this question. It says, I'm having a major issue in my daughter's school regarding de facto segregation through the AAP program. While most parents are waiting on classroom assignments, I'm waiting to see if my child is again the only person of color in her classroom. What are we going to do to combat the practice of waiving children who do not test into these programs as a way to force a segregated school? Who would like to address that? There is no answer to that? Is that something we need to think about? Commissioner Mackey? If we can pass her microphone, please. Oh, that microphone works as well. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It's bigger than just testing into them. I have to press a button. That's one of my concerns as well. It goes far beyond testing into a program. It goes to the way that we pack our schools. You look at the drawing of attendance lines, and you see that certain schools are created to be less diverse, and it's happening more rapidly and more, particularly in our district. It's called happenstance, but I don't think that's the case, and we're working on things like that. And if there's a trickle-down effect, you look at programs, you look at AP classes, you look at magnet programs. They're supposed to reflect the population they serve, but they don't. If your attendance lines or your schools are looking a certain way, they're looking less and less diverse, then these programs are going to be less and less diverse. And those are things to tackle at the school board level, at the executive level, at the policy building level. And I encourage parents, I know you're busy raising your kids and things like that, but come to a school board meeting. If you can't send an email, if you can't make a phone call, make people who are elected to represent your concerns accountable to you. Because when the squeaky wheel gets the oil, when people hear from you, I was in a meeting just recently, I won't say what meeting or where, but the comment was made that, well, we haven't heard from anybody. You know, I addressed a concern about something, and well, parents haven't said anything to us, so we haven't heard anything. Really? You know, and in people's defense, if your perspective is not very diverse, I don't mean with regard to color, but if your perspective is pretty one-dimensional, and it's not your fault, then sometimes you have to hear from other people, but please make your voice heard. Send an email, make a phone call, or something. Talk to somebody who will say something. At our school, I know that before I got on the board, I was the school improvement council person, and it was my hobby, actually. It was taking people's concerns. Sorry.
Why don't we switch out microphones? I just want to make sure everyone can hear you. Thank you.
If I heard somebody in a football game or walking in a hall having a complaint, I'm like, oh, no one's listening to my complaint with regard to, a class. I think, oh, I know who you can talk to. And we talk to this person or that person. No, because, I feel uncomfortable. I said, well, I'll help you with that. Trying to help people. But if you can find somebody to help you or say something that just trying to get your concerns heard and find you a good go-to person. And I was that go-to person because I like troubleshooting. Find you a good go-to person or someone who will listen to what your concerns are so that other people will say that they've heard your concerns. With the AP classes and things like that, it has to do with the way that our schools are packed.
Well, and that goes back to our elected leadership and goes back to voters being engaged and informed and all of those things. I want to get in, again, we have at least 3 or 4 more questions from our audience. John, this question is for you, John Dozier from USC, and I'm going to combine 2 because they're very similar. The question is, what would an ideal school look like if it were truly culturally and racially diverse? And it also is another question about what is being done to teach diversity in our schools, if someone else would like to weigh in on that, but that's for John Dozier.
You know, I don't know that I have necessarily a specific answer for what schools look like, but I mean, I think that obviously the schools that we should have are not the ones that we necessarily have today. And what I mean by that is every child should have the same access to the same quality of education. And I think that that's a baseline for where we should be in terms of educating everyone. And if that then means that everyone has the same access to AP courses, the same education, preferably